My name is Elaine Whitmore. I'm 72 years old. And I just got discharged from Swedish Medical Center in Seattle after 3 months of surgeries, complications, and silence. Silence so deep that it wrapped itself around me like a second hospital gown. I had a stroke. One that took my left side and nearly took the rest of me. The doctors say I was lucky. Lucky because I didn't die. Lucky because I might regain most of my mobility. But no one warns you how it feels to come back to life when the world has already started moving on without you. I used to own a business, Whitmore & Associates. We did accounting and consulting for small and mid-sized businesses all over the city. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. I started it from the spare bedroom after my youngest was born. Built it up to a 3-floor office in Belltown. Ran it for 37 years. I put all 3 of my children through college. I paid off 2 mortgages. I buried my husband. And I kept everything afloat. Somehow, when I opened my eyes in the hospital, I expected things would be hard. I didn't expect they would be gone. Today was my discharge day. Marcus was waiting by the door in a suit that looked like it cost more than my first car. Rebecca kept glancing at her phone. Barely looking at me, David stood a little behind them, fidgeting, like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. And just like that, I knew. Something had changed while I was sleeping. Something deep. Something final. The car ride started with silence. Just the sound of the wheels and my breathing, which still came in uneven bursts if I wasn't careful. Marcus was driving. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat. David and I were in the back. I tried to smile at him. He didn't smile back. I was holding a plastic hospital bag in my lap. Inside was everything. I had a change of clothes. My reading glasses. A small Bible my mother had given me when I turned 30. That was it. 37 years of life reduced to what I could carry in one hand. It was Marcus who spoke first. He cleared his throat, like he was leading a board meeting. Mom, we've been talking. With the lawyers, with the financial advisor, and with everything going on your medical bills. In the state of the business, it didn't make sense to wait. Wait for what I asked. He didn't answer me directly. Rebecca turned slightly. Her tone clipped. We had to act. You weren't conscious. And the firm was underwater. We used the power of attorney for your emergency care. And it extended to financial decisions. We made the tough calls. Mom, tough calls. That was what they called it. We dissolved the company. Marcus said. We sold the building. The assets were divided. I stared out the window. Seattle passed in slow motion. Trees without leaves. Gray skis. My city. My life. Slipping by like it belonged to someone else now. The house, I asked. What about my house? It's gone. Mom, David said quietly. We had to. The payments. The taxes, it wasn't sustainable. You mean, you sold my home while I was unconscious. It wasn't safe for you to live alone anymore. Rebecca said. We had to think long term. We're looking into a facility. Sunset Hollow. It's nice. You'll qualify for assistance now that you're no longer holding major assets. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. My voice felt like it was stuck behind glass. We saved what we could. Marcus added. The 3 of us. For the family. I wanted to scream. But instead, I just asked one question. What about me? The silence in that car said everything I needed to know. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. I just asked them to pull over. We had stopped at a red light not far from the hospital. There was a bus stop on the corner. I told Marcus I needed air. He sighed, probably thinking I was being dramatic. But he pulled over. I stepped out onto the curb, gripping the hospital bag like it was a lifeline. I could feel their eyes on me through the car window. I didn't look back. The wind was sharp and dry. Fall in Seattle always felt like a warning. Leaves scraping the pavement. That faint metallic scent of rain just out of reach. I sat down on the bench, letting my left leg rest. It still dragged slightly. and I didn't trust it yet. "Mom, where are you going?" Rebecca asked from the car. I didn't answer. "You can't just walk off," Marcus added. "We're trying to help you." I stayed silent. David looked like he wanted to get out and follow me. But he didn't. "We'll visit," Marcus said, as if he were offering a consolation prize. "As often as we can." They pulled away. A brand new Lexus. Probably paid for with the last of my retirement accounts. I sat there a long time. People came and went. Families helping each other. Nurses on break. A man wheeled his mother to the curb and kissed her on the cheek before gently helping her into a minivan. I watched the way his hand never left her back. No one held my back. The bus arrived. I had $17 and a bus pass that expired in 2 weeks. It was enough. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked if I needed help. I shook my head. I wasn't sure what I needed. The city passed by the window in pieces. Street signs I knew. Stores I used to walk by when I had somewhere to be. Now I just watched them drift. I didn't know where I was going. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going with them. The Riverside Inn charged $38 a night. Cash only. The room smelled like bleach and old cigarette smoke. But it had a bed. A lamp. And a door that locked. That was enough. I paid for 3 nights. The manager barely looked at me. Just slid the key across the counter and pointed toward the stairs. "No ID check." New questions? Places like that survive on silence. In the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and took out my phone. I still remembered the passwords. I still knew how to check statements. Accounts. Insurance. Everything was gone. My personal bank accounts were frozen. My business account had been closed. The firm's website was down. My email no longer worked. Even my health insurance had been converted to Medicare. They had covered every base. My LinkedIn profile said, "Former owner." My name didn't show up on the business registry anymore. It was like I had never existed. Not as a professional. Not as a provider. Not as someone worth remembering. I called the last client I had worked with. Janet Morrison. We had handled her books for over a decade. She answered. Her voice softened when she realized it was me. "Elaine," she said. "I heard you were very sick." I told her I was recovering. "Oh, honey," she said. Marcus explained everything. He said, "You might be confused now. He's handling everything just fine." I thanked her and hung up. My hand was shaking. They didn't just take my money. They erased me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the small motel table, surrounded by pieces of a life that no longer existed. Old business cards, award letters, framed certificates I had packed up when we downsized the office before the stroke. Things I'd held onto because they meant something. Because they proved I'd built something. Now they just mocked me. I gathered everything into a plastic bag and carried it out to the parking lot. There was a rusted metal trash can near the alley. I asked the manager for a book of matches. He didn't ask why. Just handed it over like he'd done this before. I lit one. Then another. Fed the papers into the fire slowly, watching them curl and blacken and vanish. My business degree. My Chamber of Commerce award. The newspaper clipping from when we expanded to our 3rd floor. They went up in smoke like they'd never happened. A few other motel guests stood nearby, smoking or pretending not to watch. No one said a word. This place understood what it meant to bury your old life. Back in the room, I stood in front of the mirror. My hair had grown thin and silver over the past few years. I used to have it done every 2 weeks. Not anymore. I found the motel scissors and started cutting. No plan. No style. Just cutting until the old version of me was gone. What was left in the mirror looked hollow. Gaunt. Eyes too large. Skin too pale. But she looked like someone who had been through something. She looked real. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something solid inside me. Good. I thought, that's exactly who I need to be. By the end of the week, I was out of money. I needed work. And I needed it fast. I took the bus downtown to a temp agency that specialized in placing older workers. The woman at the front desk, Maria Santos, glanced at the motel address on my application, but didn't comment. She just asked if I had data entry experience. I told her I ran an accounting firm for 37 years. She smiled politely. Right. But have you worked with spreadsheets, filing systems, phones? Yes. I said, I can learn anything you need me to. She gave me a part-time job at a women's shelter on the east side. Basic admin work. Answering calls. Filing intake paperwork. It paid minimum wage. But it was something. Cascade Women's Shelter was in a converted church. The chapel had been turned into a dorm with 30 beds. There was a kitchen, a kids' playroom, and a small back office with 2 desks and an old desktop computer. The director, Carmen Rodriguez, gave me the tour. She was in her 30s. Tired eyes. Warm voice. The kind of person who didn't have time for small talk but always remembered your name. She told me most of the women were survivors. Domestic violence. Evictions. Jobs lost. Families that had pushed them out. The average stay was 6 weeks. Some longer. She showed me to the desk and said, we need someone who can keep track of the little things. Answer phones. Keep files straight. Help people feel human again. I nodded. That I could do. By the 3rd day, I started to notice the cracks. Paper files stacked in corners. Donor records on sticky notes. Grant applications half filled and forgotten. It wasn't neglect. It was overload. Carmen was brilliant at the human side. But the system around her was falling apart. And if there was one thing I still knew how to fix, it was a broken system. I stayed late on Friday. No one asked me to. I just couldn't stand the mess. The intake files were scattered across 3 mismatched cabinets, organized by someone's idea of alphabetical order, but with half the folders missing tabs. I spent 2 hours cleaning, relabeling, and building a simple spreadsheet on the shelter's outdated computer to track bed availability and intake status. I didn't say anything to Carmen. On Monday, she noticed. You did this? She asked. I nodded. She didn't say thank you. She just stared for a moment, like she was trying to figure out what kind of part-time admin staff reorganized a broken system on their own time. By the end of the week, I had overhauled the donation tracking process. The week after, I started researching grant opportunities. I found 3. The shelter qualified for grants no one had applied for because the paperwork felt overwhelming. I drafted applications on my nights off. Quietly. No praise expected. Carmen found one of the drafts in the shared folder. Where did you learn to do this? She asked, holding the printed copy. I used to run a business. I told her. What kind accounting? Small firm. But we did all right. She studied me more closely then. Took in my second-hand clothes. The way I moved carefully, favoring my left leg. She noticed the bags under my eyes. The Riverside Inn address on my file. What happened? My family. I said. That was all I had to say. In that place. She understood immediately. That night, I walked back to the motel and stood in front of the mirror again. My face hadn't changed. But something else had. I looked like someone who mattered again. The crisis hit on a Tuesday morning in December. I walked into the office to find Carmen hunched over her desk, surrounded by papers and a laptop screen showing a state audit letter. She looked up, eyes bloodshot. Elaine, we need to talk. The audit had gone back 3 years. The shelter's financial reports didn't match the grant agreements. Some donor funds were miscategorized. Others were spent in ways that violated state restrictions. The number was staggering. $140,000. That's what the state claimed the shelter owed. Proofs penalties. We don't have it, Carmen said flatly. We barely have enough to keep the heat on through January. I sat beside her and began reading through the documents. There were numbers that didn't make sense. Categories that looked like someone had rewritten them after the fact. Payments with no clear origin. Signatures that didn't match. Carmen, I said quietly, I don't think your last bookkeeper made mistakes. What do you mean I think she was stealing from you? Carmen didn't speak. Outside the office, I could hear the shelter coming to life. Kids laughing. Coffee brewing. The sound of women trying to hold on to normal. I kept reading. The pattern was there. Buried under sloppy files and good intentions. Adjustments made just after deposits. Vendor payments that were suspiciously round numbers. Receipts that didn't exist. Can you prove it? Maybe. But not before the state shuts you down. The board meets tonight, she said. They'll probably vote to close. If we liquidate the shelter and return what we can, we avoid criminal charge. What about the women, I asked? 37 residents. 12 children. They'll have to go. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. I looked out the window at a woman named Sarah, helping her toddler put on snow boots in the hallway. No. Not yet. The board meeting was held in the small conference room behind the chapel. The table was scratched and uneven. 7 people sat around it like they were attending a wake. Carmen introduced me as the administrative assistant. I sat in the corner. Quiet. Unnoticed. They discussed logistics. How to notify residents. How to manage asset liquidation before the state filed charges. We have until January 15th. The board president said. If we don't pay the full amount, the shelter gets shut down. Permanently. Someone asked about emergency fundraising. They all knew the answer. We'd need a miracle. After 20 minutes of grim discussion, the vote began. 6 hands started to rise. Excuse me, I said from the corner. They all turned to look. Carmen blinked. Confused. Before you vote, I said, I'd like to present another option. I stood and walked to the front. My left hand shook slightly. But my voice didn't. I've reviewed the audit. I told them, I believe the discrepancies weren't due to accounting mistakes. They were embezzlement. I laid out a folder of evidence. Bank statements. Altered documents. Forged signatures. The pattern was clear. Someone had stolen from the shelter for years. This changes things legally, I said. I contacted the state auditor's office. When I presented the evidence, they agreed to suspend the repayment demand pending a criminal investigation. Silence. So the shelter no longer owes the money, not if the funds were stolen. I said. That's what the state will now investigate. That's amazing. Carmen whispered. But we're still broke. I know, I said. That's why I'm offering this. I pulled out a cashier's check for $50,000 and placed it on the table. It's a bridge loan. No interest. Repayable only when the shelter is financially stable. Enough to cover operations for 6 months while we apply for grants and rebuild. Dorothy, the board president, picked up the check like it might vanish. Elaine, where did this come from? I sold something. I said simply. What I didn't tell them was that I'd cashed in the last life insurance policy my husband had left behind. The one my children never knew about. The only thing I had left. Because 37 women and 12 children shouldn't be homeless for Christmas. The vote was unanimous. The shelter would stay open. Carmen looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Who are you? I didn't answer. Not yet. 3 years later, I stood behind a microphone in the state capitol building, preparing to testify before the Senate Committee on Human Services. My nameplate read, Elaine Whitmore, Executive Director, Washington Coalition for Elder Justice. The title still felt new. But it was mine. Behind me sat Carmen, now our Director of Client Services. Around the room were representatives from nonprofits, shelters, and advocacy groups across the state. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. Senator Wells asked me to state my name for the record. Elaine Whitmore. I said, Executive Director. I had come a long way from a motel room and a burnt stack of business cards. We were there to support Senate Bill 849, a bill to increase protections for elderly adults from financial exploitation by family members, power of attorney abuse, illegal transfers, forced institutionalization. All of it. I told stories. I shared data. I answered questions with the confidence of someone who had lived it, not just studied it. At one point, I glanced at the back of the room. A man sat alone in the gallery, wearing a dark suit. My son David. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. But our eyes met, and that was enough. After the hearing, I walked down the marble steps into the February cold. Carmen caught up to me on the sidewalk. How do you think it went? Wells and Santos are solid. I said, Hayes is still a maybe. She nodded. We'll keep pushing. We were a good team. She had left the shelter a year after we saved it. Ready to do more. Together, we'd built a statewide network that connected vulnerable adults with legal support and safe housing. We trained shelter staff. We wrote policy. We helped pass real laws. No one had given us permission. We built it anyway. That night, I sat in my small apartment above a bakery in Capitol Hill. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet. And it was mine. I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Me and Carmen. The governor. A plaque in my hand. I didn't miss the company I lost. I didn't even miss the children who left me behind. Because I had found something better. A voice. A mission. A life that was mine. The call came on a Thursday morning. My assistant knocked on the office door and said there was someone here to see me. Said his name was David. I hadn't seen him since the day I testified at the Capitol. I thought he might reach out. He hadn't. Not until now. He stood in the reception area, turning his baseball cap in his hands. He looked thinner. Tired. Older than 32. When he saw me, he smiled like he didn't know if he was allowed to. Hi, Mom, he said. I nodded and led him into my office. He didn't sit down. He just looked around. At the awards on the wall, the news clippings, the photo of me and the governor shaking hands. This is a lot, he said. I waited. He finally sat. His hands clasped tight between his knees. I need to tell you something. About Marcus and Rebecca. About everything we did? I didn't interrupt. He told me they'd started moving money out of the company months before my stroke. Marcus had set up new accounts. Rebecca had helped with the paperwork. They told David it was necessary. That I was slipping. That the business was at risk. That it was for the good of the family. I believed them. He said. I didn't question it until later. He pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots. Transfers. Emails. A spreadsheet with columns of dollar signs and dates that lined up exactly with the weeks I was in the hospital. $840,000. That's what they took. We split it 3 ways. David said, I bought a house in Lake Oswego. Rebecca used her share to start her firm. Marcus invested in real estate. But now, it's all falling apart. Marcus is being investigated. Wire fraud. Money laundering. The FBI is involved. He's scared. He thinks maybe if you talk to the prosecutors, tell them it was a misunderstanding. That you're not pressing charges. His voice trailed off. He looked at me then. Not with entitlement. But with something closer to shame. I don't expect forgiveness. He said. I just couldn't carry it anymore. I nodded slowly. Then I stood up and walked to the window. I didn't say anything. Not yet. When I turned back to him, I saw it. The weight of guilt. The way it had aged him. He looked like a boy again. Like the son who used to leave dandelions on my nightstand. But he wasn't just that boy anymore. Why are you really here? David. He didn't answer right away. Because if Marcus is indicted, he's going to drag us all down with him. And I need to know what you're going to do. I walked to my desk. opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a black leather folder. I set it between us. "What's this?" he asked. "Evidence," I said, "of what you all did. The transfers, the signatures, the dissolution documents, everything." He stared at it. "You've been collecting this for years. Why? Because the truth matters. Because what you did wasn't just betrayal. It was criminal. And you convinced yourselves it was protection." He looked sick. "Are you giving it to the FBI?" I smiled. "Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity?" "David," I said, "I gave it to them 3 years ago." He didn't speak. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Just a long exhale like he'd been punched. "Everything that comes next is out of my hands," I said. "And honestly, I'm glad. You can't fix what happened. But maybe, finally, you'll be held accountable for it." He didn't argue. He stood, slowly, and left the office without another word. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just picked up the folder, put it back in the drawer, and went on with my day. That night, I sat alone in my apartment above the bakery. The smell of bread baking drifted up through the vents like a quiet comfort. My desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across a pile of policy briefs. I should have felt unsettled, shaken. My son had just confessed to stealing my life. But all I felt was stillness. It wasn't peace exactly. It was something deeper, like knowing the ground beneath you won't give out again. I looked around the room. The framed bills I helped pass, the press photo from when the governor signed the Financial Protection Act, a printout of the state budget that now included funding for elder care ombudsman. Each one marked something I'd built with my own hands, something no one could take. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who spent weekends in the office, who paid the tuition bills, who stayed quiet at holidays so her kids wouldn't fight. She was strong in ways no one saw, but she was invisible too. A background figure in her own life. That woman died on the sidewalk outside the hospital. I didn't bury her. Life did. What rose in her place was slower, quieter, but sharper. I didn't ask for this version of myself. But once she arrived, I never wanted to go back. People always say, time heals. I don't believe that. Time only gives you distance. It's what you do with that distance that matters. I didn't heal because someone said sorry. I healed because I decided to speak. Because I stood in rooms full of lawmakers and said, "This is wrong." Because I refused to let silence be my legacy. I used to think legacy was money, buildings, business cards. But it's not. It's who you become after everything you built gets taken from you. And who you choose to protect once you've survived. Sometimes I wonder what Marcus and Rebecca tell themselves. If they sleep well, if they believe it was all justified, I'll never know. I don't need to. I don't want revenge. I want protection. For the next woman, the next father, the next forgotten parent lying in a hospital bed while their children sign away the life they worked for. That's what matters now. That's what I chose. I turned off the lamp and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights flickered in the winter dark. People passed below talking, rushing, living. I watched them for a while. Not with envy. With belonging. Because I am still here. My name is Elaine Whitmore. And I chose to matter.